As a matter of fact, the last time that the DG was with us at the villa, I had to say to the president that after many years of bullying me with his height, I introduced to him the DG, and he had to look up to greet the DG. And he commented that he's very tall. Thank you very much, DG, and thank you for the very kind invitation to be here for the Maiden Policy Making and Good Governance Lecture Series. Your Excellency, the Governor of Plateau State, and my serial host here, the Right Excellency, the Deputy Governor of Plateau, Ayo Omotayo, and Plateau State Council of Chiefs and Emirs, Dr. Jacob Giang Buba. The Vice Chancellor, University of Jos, Professor Tanko Ishaya, the management and staff of the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. Let me say before I begin that I very strongly believe in the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. And I believe strongly in its capacity to be, in the coming years and months, the leading thought leader for Africa in policy matters, for Africa, not just for Nigeria, but for Africa. And I think that we have everything, course after course, and as has been pointed out, I've been coming here since 2015, and course after course, participants after participants. I'm completely overwhelmed by the quality of individuals, the quality of personnel who come here and who are trained in policy issues and who eventually go out there to influence policy one way or the other. So I hope that the 45 course participants, of course, and I will just to be sure that we have the topic, it is building or creating a homeland for all, creating a homeland for all. Nation building in a diverse democracy, creating a homeland for all. Nation building in a diverse democracy. And I want to just emphasize that the focus of my lecture will be on, when I say diversity, I'm referring in particular to ethnic and religious diversity, and to see how it is that we can truly be searching for a good place to rent, a good house to rent. I met my landlord-to-be, who happened to be an elderly lawyer, who obviously did more real estate than legal practice. I mean, he was mainly just in business of real estate. So when I met him, he let me know that there were 3 categories of people that he would not rent his property to. Of course, he didn't know who I was. And the 3 categories of people that he would not rent his properties to were Igbos, Ijebus, and lawyers. Igbos, Ijebus, and lawyers. He made it very clear to me. I was disqualified on 2 accounts. To his embarrassment, that I was a law teacher, and at the time advisor to the then Attorney General of the Federation. And of course, that I'm also Ijebu. I've shared this story to illustrate a point that I think is hugely important, which is that prejudice and bias are natural aspects of human nature. Everyone has prejudices and preferences that are reinforced by stories and narratives that they hear. Prejudice is a function of environment in which one is socialized and the level of exposure that one has. All across this country, different ethnicities are subjects of popular stereotypes, whether it is the notion that Ijebus are stingy, or that Igbos have an excessive love for money, or that the Fulanis are cunning, unforgiving, or more recently, violent, or that the Ebira and the Ika are practitioners of seasoned witchcraft. These are stereotypes, and they are, of course, by the very nature of stereotypes, wild generalizations, most likely to be false, and unlikely to hold up to any kind of empirical tests. But they are the narratives people have woven about other tribes and, in fact, people of other religions. Sometimes these stories are repeated so many times that they are soon accepted as facts. And when we accept these stories as facts about other people, and people of other ethnicities and people of other religions, who we have potentially destructive situations. Elections, for example, by their very nature, tend to be already divisive. Partisan democratic competition compels us to align ourselves with the camps that most reflect our ideals and aspirations. In a diverse society such as ours, democratic competition is intensified by the socio-cultural cleavages that exist in society. This is true of any heterogeneous society or democracy. In an election cycle in which the major contenders come from different ethno-regional classes or zones, there was always a sense that the competition was going to be particularly intense. But at the same time, it would not be accurate to reduce other than their natal regions. Unfortunately, one of the unsavory tendencies that was witnessed in this election cycle, and has been so in previous ones, but perhaps heightened somewhat, was the weaponization of ethnic, religious, and sectional prejudices in ways that are damaging to social cohesion. Religion was quite clearly made an issue. And in some parts of the country, political biases are introduced even between denominations. In some cases, ethnic profiling took place at polling booths. There's a popular female food blogger and YouTuber called Yemi, a Yoruba woman, who took to her verified Twitter handle to say, and I quote, "My husband and I were not allowed to vote. They said we look like Igbo people. I can't believe this," end of quote. Almost without fail, in every election cycle, politicians have forcefully, either overtly or covertly, sought to persuade voters that voting for their particular candidate or the particular political party they favor is the will of God, and that voting for the opposing party was a violation of the divine will. Repeatedly, we hear of prophets who support political parties, one way or the other. This is a matter of great concern because long after an election is over, and long after the leading contenders have sheathed their swords, the rhetoric, the words, and the means used to compete can have adverse long-term effects on society. Where the forces of primordial division and polarization are harnessed for the sake of electoral gain, the venom of such devices remain and continue to poison communal relations, setting neighbors against neighbors. And we have witnessed the catastrophic consequences of the political weaponization of prejudice and bias in places such as Rwanda. No one could have believed that in a small country with two ethnic groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis, who speak the same language, that ethnic sentiments will be exploited to the extent that it set both groups against each other and led to the Rwandan genocide in which 1 million people died. In that conflict, people who had lived together side by side for years were set upon by their own neighbors and murdered in the most gruesome fashion. Even in our own history as a people, there are ample milestones that serve as a warning against indulging in bigotry and prejudice. Some of the political rhetoric that we have heard in the course of this election cycle have been disturbing because they recall similar rhetoric used by politicians during some of the darkest chapters of our country's existence. In the First Republic, the exploitation of prejudice and incitement of hatred against ethnic communities led to the collapse of that democratic dispensation. It led to bloody pogroms and a civil war that cost in excess of 2 million lives. We talk about the Civil War, but we seem to ignore the fact that it was the manipulation of ethno-religious sentiment that eventually boiled over into that tragedy. The demons released by that bloody conflict amongst brothers are yet to be fully caged, and we pay the price of that healing process every day. That is not a chapter of our history that we should ever allow to repeat itself. The Rwandese took deliberate steps to ensure that the tragedy they experienced would never be repeated. The charged rhetoric and a raft of laws that criminalize divisive attitudes and behavior. We also must do the hard work of providing and implementing a framework for fair, just, and unifying dealings amongst our peoples. We must also create a framework and that enables us to be able to enforce strictly the laws against the use of divisive rhetoric, especially ethnically bigoted or religiously bigoted rhetoric. Let me be clear. People do not suddenly start hating each other during elections. While political actors may invoke ethnic or sectional sentiments in an election, these social and cultural antipathies already exist, lurking beneath the surface. And as we reflect on the takeaways from the last election cycle going forward, we must consider the prevalence of ethnic profiling and other forms of day-to-day discrimination that occur. We must consider the various forms of bigotry and prejudice that are not only present in our politics, but are transmitted and effectively mainstreamed by the media and other social forces. The association of whole ethnic communities with certain types of criminality, which amounts to wholesale criminalization of an identity and the habit of tarring groups with the misdeeds of individuals, are deeply problematic. If we normalize these attitudes and habits, it should not surprise us that they come to the fore during a heated electoral campaign. And I must say, just for emphasis, that when a group of people or when individuals, no matter how many they may be, do certain things, it is so easy for us to simply criminalize an entire tribe of people because of the actions of a few. And we have done this kind of profiling in so many different ways, such that if you ask anyone who is doing this, you will say, oh, it's people of this tribe. Who is doing that is people of that tribe. But the vast majority of the people of that tribe do not even know that such things exist. So these kinds of ethnic profiling is dangerous, and it has to be contained. And it has been contained in other places. And I'm sure that part of what part of the policies that I hope will develop from here will be studying these other societies that have been able to contain ethnic profiling in the way that it is done, in the way that is so destructive to our communities. But believe it or not, Nigeria is changing. There are no longer any ethnically homogeneous enclaves in Nigeria. As our own nations have evolved, one of the most discernible changes that we have witnessed is the disappearance of ethnically homogeneous spaces. Everywhere across the country, people from diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds are schooling together, doing business together, commingling, intermarrying, and raising families. Our much talked about linguistic diversity is not a barrier, as many Nigerians are multilingual. Increasingly, we see that the heart and face of a new Nigeria is a socio-cultural hybrid, appreciative of the cultural diversity of our society, attuned to its culture, but also blessed with an inclusive cosmopolitan outlook. For many of these Nigerians, young Nigerians in particular, their ethnic and national identities are not in contradiction. Who belong to the most globalized generation in our country's history. This is especially true. Their friendships, their education, their lived experiences have brought them into contact with a favorable variety of identities and cultures in their societies and on the planet. And we see their multicultural outlook in the social networks, in the entrepreneurial partnerships, and their political activism, which transcend the old primordial allegiances. And we saw a lot of that in the politics of this particular election cycle. A lot of the young people simply chose how they wanted to vote. And many of them disregarded old primordial allegiances. They disregarded, in many cases, tribe. It's not only intentional migration, by the way, that diversifies our communities. Over the past 3 decades, conflicts and climatological events have also diversified. For instance, floods, droughts have displaced large populations of our people, driving them from their traditional homesteads in search of survival and safety. And so they take refuge in safer communities, they plant roots there and make those places their new homes. And this is one of the engines of change that has become transformative for our communities and neighborhoods. And there's really nothing intrinsically wrong with this, because in any event, this is how nations evolve. All Nigerians are guaranteed the right to freedom of movement by the Constitution. However, as human societies have evolved, there was a realization that prosperity and progress lay in the widening cycle of inclusion and broadening of our definitions of sameness. Tribes have given way to nations, and along with this, new forms of socio-political organizations, more expansive interpretations of kinship have emerged. A common citizenship based on a cosmopolitan worldview has become the standard for societies across the world. Discrimination against people on the basis of their identity is explicitly condemned by most legal codes, including our own Constitution. But there is still a tension that exists between this new Nigeria and the old Nigeria, as understood by a generation that is much more accustomed to political mobilization on the basis of identity. But we must ennoble and validate the Nigeria that our young people are consciously, or sometimes even unconsciously, building. This is the future that we want. But as human beings, it's natural to react to changes in our environment with some degree of anxiety. For many Nigerians, as we witness our communities become more diverse and more complex, there are natural concerns about what this means for our own societies, what this means for our own homes. These elections witness the exploitation by political actors of the fears and anxieties of people about so-called outsiders. Any attempt to deny people the right to vote in any locality on the basis that they do not belong in that place is condemnable in the strongest terms. Social integration is one of the highest ideals of our Constitution, which guarantees every citizen the right to traverse the length and breadth of this country without hindrance and to settle in any place of their choice. It affirms the right of all Nigerians not to be discriminated against on the basis of their identity. Above all, it holds up integration as a priority. The framers of our Constitution did not intend to create an apartheid system that distinguishes between natives and settlers, nor did they in fact create one. They sought to create a civic nation. So it is possible to conquer ethnic or religious prejudice and build a unified nation. And I think that that in itself should be a rhetorical question. Can we truly conquer ethnic prejudices, religious prejudices, and build a unified nation? I think we can. But it's a journey, it's not an event. And it's perhaps the most important issue in nation building. Indeed, as humanity sought to build a more durable, just, and sustainable civilization, we learned that our natural prejudices and our allied irredentist urges have to be disciplined and sublimated in a mutually rooted, shared humanity. We cannot without discipline. Some of the discipline comes by the force of law. We simply have to discipline our natural urges. there's a recognition that sociocultural diversity, while being a fact of life, is neither a weapon nor a weakness. And the most prosperous places on the face of the earth are places that have learned to harness diversity while building even more inclusive institutions. Singapore and Tanzania are countries that have gone far in conquering prejudice, and I had mentioned earlier Rwanda. In Singapore, the statesman, Lee Kuan Yew, promoted policies aimed at establishing social cohesion in a racially and ethnically heterogeneous nation. Among such initiatives was the ethnic integration policy, which sought to prevent the formation of ethnic conclaves and to promote the integration of minority groups. It specified the proportion of flats that could be owned by the various ethnic groups, and this created a much more balanced ethnic mix in the various housing estates that were built in Singapore. Singapore made English the official language, established legislative and policy safeguards to guarantee the rights of minorities and to ensure that government does not pass laws that overtly or covertly discriminate against any race or religion. Lee Kuan Yew's government also entrenched meritocracy as its dominant public philosophy. In 2019, the Gallup World Poll, Singapore was rated top out of 124 countries for tolerance of ethnic minorities, and 95% of respondents stated in that survey that for racial and ethnic minorities, Singapore was a good place to live. This was higher than the global average of 70%. Tanzania is another example of a country that has been able to effectively manage its diversity. Its founding president, Julius Nyerere, wanted to avoid tribal prejudice that had plagued other African countries and implemented 3 measures. He promoted an overarching national identity by establishing Kiswahili as national language. Second, he promoted a pan-Tanzanian history, a deliberate writing of history, which he introduced into primary school curriculum, which taught children to see themselves, first and foremost, as Tanzanians. In doing this, he was not attempting to erase ethnic identities, but to ensure that ethnic prejudices did not blossom. And he achieved this aim of making Tanzanian citizenship the primary way in which Tanzanians saw and identified themselves. Nyerere was also a sincere preacher of national unity and coexistence. I believe that Nigeria is neither unique nor exceptional on account of her diversity. The genre of scholarship and public polemic that makes a problem of our country's profusion of ethnicities and religions and characterizes it as a profound flaw is one that I differ strongly with. I very strongly differ that merely because we are ethnic nations that came together or that we are from different religions, for that reason it is necessarily a huge problem that is insurmountable. My diversity is neither a liability nor a curse. It is in fact a blessing and an asset. Diversity deepens the pool of socio-cultural capital available to us. We're enriched by the frothy ferment of the vast multiplicity of perspectives which provide us with a treasury of tools for growth and progress. And I have long maintained that in Nigeria, what is at issue is not and has never been our diversity, but our capacity to manage it with a sense of fairness, equity, and justice. There's no denying that diversity can be a harbinger of friction, and we've seen it anyway, so often. It's natural. As different groups from various backgrounds and with different worldviews mingle, their interaction is characterized by a degree of tension and even conflict. All diverse nations find their unique ways of managing the tensions which inevitably arise from the co-mingling of an assortment of people. And let me add that inclusion is essential to prosperity. As we go forward, there is another reason, this is another reason why divisive politics is completely counterproductive. Over the past 5 decades, we have sustained a political economy in which our crude oil wealth, extracted at considerable cost to the Niger Delta, has been the fuel of economic and administrative life of our country. In recent years, it has become clear that we are now entering a post-oil age. And whether we like it or not, with all the developments in the world, and all the talk about energy transition and all the talk about renewable energy, whether we like it or not, we are certainly entering a period when oil is going to grow in irrelevance. Our developmental and growth aspirations cannot be centered around the distribution of rents from oil. We have realized what the advanced economies have long recognized. In the 21st century, the true wealth of nations is human capital. And this means that places that have learned to attract and retain the most diverse pool of capital, of skilled capital, easily win the race for success. Diversity means a multiplicity of perspectives and worldviews. But this also provides a broad range of cultural, philosophical, and intellectual approaches for solving problems. In this rich soil, nourished by various ideas and schools of thought, productive synthesis is possible and innovation flourishes. The world's richest nations are those places that have learned to attract talent from various places and to harness diversity as a driver of growth. In Nigeria, this will also increasingly be the case. A state's chances of growth will depend on how much qualitative capital it can attract, and the richer the human capital pool at its disposal, the more taxes it can harvest to fund governance and social services. In this scenario, the politics of division and tribalism will only breed poverty because it can only alienate the human capital that a state desperately needs for its growth. It will be counterproductive and destabilizing to exclude Nigerians from the political life of their communities on the basis of where they come from, while simultaneously expecting them and requiring them to pay taxes. Taxation without representation is clearly a recipe for instability. There are, of course, some issues that should focus all our commitments, affirming the right of Nigerians to be free of all forms of discrimination. It's not just a moral idea. If we are truly committed to economic growth, then we must also be committed to creating inclusive communities and strengthening social cohesion. Put another way, the only thing that grows in a climate of tribal hatred is poverty. This is why justice and healing and a stronger commitment to the ideals of integration are so important. Let me just very quickly return to the issue of elite responsibility. Leadership does not today, and Nigerian leadership today, does not have the luxury of toying with prejudice. The leadership elite, and when I refer to the leadership elite, I refer not just to the political elite, I refer also to the religious elite and to the business elite. We have a duty to conduct ourselves with a high sense of responsibility, even as we prosecute the contest for power. Historically conscious and patriotic elite all over the world recognize that beyond the letter of the law, beyond what the law asserts, there are lines that must not be crossed in the pursuit of political power, especially in fragile societies and democracies such as ours. One of such lines is the willful exploitation of sectional sentiments and the invocation of ethnic antipathies to mobilize a political constituency. It is dangerous because it's an attempt that seeks to mobilize by fostering division and hatred. And when the elite fail to compete responsibly and moderately, they foster a sense that everything goes, and all of that can only breed instability. We have seen this dynamic play out time and time again in our history. A model of competition that recognizes no ethical limits or boundaries is a threat to our democracy, is a threat to the well-being of our country. It's incumbent upon politicians and the leadership elite to act and conduct competition responsibly. In all the countries that have been relatively successful in the journey to overcoming prejudice, such as the examples I've given of Singapore and Tanzania and Rwanda that I've just talked about, leadership has been critical. Responsible leadership, a responsible leadership elite has been critical. The elites of both countries recognized, or those three countries recognized, that cohesion and peaceful existence have to be intentionally prioritized and pursued. It is not a side agenda. It's not a side issue. For these countries that have succeeded so far, they did not consider cohesion a side issue or just something we talk about. They took deliberate steps from policy to implementation. This is the challenge of leadership in our own country today. And it's a challenge that our leadership elite face. Elites have a responsibility to discipline themselves first and foremost in the pursuit of political ambitions and the exercise of power to ensure that the fabric of our communities is not rent asunder. We must recognize that if peaceful coexistence is sacrificed on the altar of partisan politics, then all will be lost. Well, we've spoken about the need for politicians to act responsibly. But that burden is also on what is called the third sector, civil society, including and perhaps especially the media. The media has a twofold responsibility. As an institution that is uniquely influential in shaping public perceptions and attitudes, it has to be extremely mindful of what sort of narratives it is projecting and how it frames disputes, especially in multicultural and heterogeneous contexts. There are also a number of measures that we must consider as we attempt to chart a way forward. First, justice is necessary. Where crimes have been committed, they must be stridently prosecuted. We know that political actors, for example, before these elections, signed a peace accord on the eve of the elections under the auspices of the National Peace Committee. One point of action is for us to assess the extent to which the actors complied with the undertakings to which they freely committed during the signing of that pact. And perhaps it's just, even if it's just to inquire, to find out to what extent was their compliance. And it might be the role of small study groups to look at it. To what extent are these peace accords relevant? To what extent are they useful? To what extent are they complied with? And what do we need to do to make them even more effective? More broadly, the government has a responsibility to resolutely affirm the rights of all Nigerians to pursue their lawful business and be free from discrimination wherever they live in their country, and to repudiate the idea that there is a hierarchy in which some Nigerians may become second-class citizens. There's absolutely nothing in our Constitution that supports the idea that Nigerians are barred from participating in public life or seeking political office because they allegedly do not belong to or do not belong in the places where they reside. And we must reject any hint of this, precisely because Nigerians are everywhere across this nation. The people that are most discriminated against in our nation are those that are referred to as non-indigenous, wherever they may live in our country. And yet many of us are non-indigenous in some way or the other. It makes no sense to exclude so many Nigerians from the public life of their communities, the communities in which they reside, and to which they are contributing, merely on account of the fact that they are considered settlers or non-indigenous. Incidentally, from the earliest days of the Republic, Nigerians of various ethnic extractions have sought and won political office outside their natal regions. The first mayor of the Enugu Municipal Council was Umaru Altani, a Fulani cattle dealer who held the position between 1952 and 1958. We have since had similar examples in our democratic practice. So we must dismiss the idea that these things are impossible. Let me conclude with another personal story. On this too, I went in for a surgery on my right femur at a hospital in Lagos. Anesthesia, which will be 3 hours or so that the operation would take. Just before I lost consciousness, a thought crossed my mind that I would be absolutely at the mercy of these surgeons and paramedics and anesthesians who surrounded the bed that I was lying on. It struck me that I had actually allow these people to take over my life, and I had to entrust them with my life. One of them was from the southeast. The head of the team was from Delta. Some were Muslims, some were Christians, some were from the north, some were from the south. In fact, I suspect that one of them, who I spoke to later, did not even believe in God. Yet, as I lay on that bed, it didn't seem to matter where they came from, because they were experts. When we make the decisions that affect our lives, and the decisions that affect our children the most, somehow we're able to ignore tribal or religious prejudices. The pilots who flew our planes, or who fly our planes, in fact, the pilots, about a couple of weeks ago, I was flown to Lagos by 2 female pilots. So for those amongst my team who discriminate against women, they were left entirely in the hands of these 2 ladies who flew us all the way to Lagos. We don't complain about the pilots who fly our planes. As a matter of fact, I said once that if I was told as I entered one of the presidential planes, if I was told that the reason why the pilot was selected was because he's from Ikenne, my hometown, I'll go down and go back to my office and wait until they can find a competent pilot from anywhere in Nigeria. I would not insist that you should come from my hometown. The teachers who teach our children in school, we don't necessarily ask where they're from so long as they are good teachers. The soldiers and other law enforcement agents who put their lives on the line for our safety every day, we don't ask them where they're from so long as they can do a good job. Even the members of our national football team, we don't care if all of them are called Osinbajo, so long as they can score. We don't care where they're from, and we don't ask those questions. This is the attitude that we must adopt always to build the nation of our dreams. Mobilizing the people of a country as complex and as heterogeneous as ours under the banner of a common purpose was never going to be an easy task. But that's not to say that it's impossible. Let us never forget that although we may speak different languages and belong to different tribes and profess diverse creeds, we are bound by a shared language and a shared hope, by a common humanity as Nigerians, and a supreme faith in all of the possibilities that lie in our country. And thank you very much for listening.
Once again, a round of applause for His Excellency, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, SAN GCON, on that topic, creating a homeland for all nation building in diverse democracy. Let's give him a resounding round of applause. Moving on, sir. It's now time for the interactive section. With the kind permission of the DG, Your Excellency, sir, during the interactive section, the participants are allowed to seek further clarification on any gray area, ask questions, or make contributions. And you will be required, sir, to give your response. The topic is creating a homeland for all nation building in diverse democracy. So we're now moving on to we are now in the interactive session, and I will take questions from all the study groups. Yes, and sir, we have 7 study groups. So I'll start with study group 1. You stand up if you are picked, introduce yourself, and then move on to your question. Yes, I would take the lefty.
am Umar Usman Kukandaka, Director sponsored by the Presidency. Your Excellency, sir, considering several narratives vis-à-vis the lecture delivered on creating a homeland for all, one can conveniently say that Nigeria as a country has never been bereft of policies as socio-economic and political policies that would have transformed the country have been formulated. Sir, coming from the nucleus of power, what will you say is the main reason why Nigeria's prejudices refuse to die over such a long period of time, as exemplified by the recent occurrence of the NSAS protest, the several fragmentations along ethnic and religious lines as regards to our voting system, as well as the dispositions of our prophets and imams along voting line? Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll move on to study group. Study group 2.
I am Engineer Professor Mohammed Sani Haruna, sponsored by the Office of the Vice President. Your Excellency, sir, I have been privileged to work closely with you and benefited from your wisdom and intervention, especially at the National Economic Council. You have been number 2 citizens and have been acting president several times. You did your job leading with capacity, knowledge, passion, and most importantly, fear of God. In 1 or 2 sentences, what will you advise us in case we found ourselves at higher executive positions for the unity and stability of Nigeria?
That's the entire basis of the presentation. All right. With the kind permission of His Excellency, I will take another question for this because your lecture has addressed this. Another person from study group 2. The Excellency will still answer your question, but I'm giving another opportunity for study group 2. Yes, anybody from study group 2? Okay, I'll take Honorable Agunsoye now, study group 1 again.
Thank you very much, sir, Your Excellency. Honorable Rotimi Agunsoye, House of Reps, sponsored by the Presidency. My question is a direct question, sir. I read in the paper yesterday that there was this kind of crisis in Nigeria immigration. What is in our law is that if you have served for 35 years or during service you've attained the age of 60, you retire. So certain set of people, it's actually in the Punch, said that the person in the affairs of Nigeria immigration attained the age of 60 last year and he was retired. But his appointment was renewed last year. Now they are saying the man is retired again, or after 6 months he should go. But is now seeking for extension of tenure to build a nation for all. Where do we put, if it is true, where do we put the rule of law and policies in this? Thank you.
Study group 3. Study group 3. I'll take CP Ben Igwe. Straight to the point.
Sir.
Don't lay any premise. Straight to the point. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I am Commissioner of Police Ben Igwe, sponsored by the Nigerian Police Force, sir. Sir, we have listened on your wonderful lecture, sir, on how 3 countries, Tanzania, Singapore, and Rwanda, how their elites came together to take a decision and change the fortune of the 3 countries. Don't we have elite in Nigeria that can come together like the elites of these countries and sit together and change our fortunes, sir? What are our elites doing?
Thank you. As member of Senior Executive, of course, you are all elites. And the presidency has gathered all of you together to do the needful. Study group 4. Hold on. Why? Everybody here is an elite. I am very sure of that. Yes, sir. Okay, study group 4. I will take the man in white.
I am Dr. Godwin Chinonsanibo, Permanent Secretary, sponsored by Enugu State Government. Your Excellency, we've listened to you with keen interest, but we would wish to know, with a view of, by way of introspection, we've been in separatist agitations and ethno-religious tensions in Nigeria, vis-a-vis the quest, to create a homeland for all Nigerians. Bearing in mind that a Fulani man was a mayor of Enugu in 1952, can we really replicate that in present-day Nigeria? Thank you.
Okay. I'll move on to study group 5. Study group 5, the INEC chairman.
My name is Uchenna Unigwe, sponsored by Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. So my question is as follows. Why has it been difficult to deal with those who promote and weaponize ethnic and religious prejudices for personal gains? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Straight and direct. I hope I've not jumped any study group. I'm going to study group 6 now, Study group 6. Study group 6. I will take Mr. Sam Hart.
I am Sam Ifeanyi Hart, sponsored by the presidency. Your Excellency, sir, I drove the Maiden campaign, and I publicly acknowledge the role you played personally towards the phenomenal placement of Aba on the firmament of SME in Nigeria. We are very grateful for that, sir. Thank you. Sir, part of nation building is policy continuity. The people of Aba are agitated and they want to know, and they have asked me to ask you, sir, what is the guarantee that after you leave office in a short while, all of the phenomenal work you did to put Aba on the front burner will be continued by subsequent administrations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I will now take... Yes, ask your question. Hold on a little while. Okay. Yes.
I am Dr. Mrs. Aditayo Akintunde John Fishers, sponsored by the presidency. Sir, on this platform, failure of policies have been a very topical issue and it's raised a lot of concerns. Your Excellency, sir, and my DG, starting this maiden edition of the lecture on nation building in a diverse democracy, I believe will be sustained. However, is it possible to institute a law and indeed policy and punitive actions against those who may want to disrupt the expression of what this lecture is meant to attain? Thank you.
Study group 7. Study group 7. I'm going to take, especially because His Excellency is from the legal department, I'm going to take Barrister Khalid. This is the first round, then we'll go for the second round.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. I am Ahmed Rufai Khalid, General Manager, sponsored by NMPC. In addition to what you have told us, particularly about Rwanda, I wish to also share an experience I had when I went to Rwanda. And it had to do with asking about their tribe. Almost every taxi I entered, I will try to ask about the tribe of the taxi driver. And I had a uniform response, which was that I'm a Rwandan. Only one taxi told me that it is an offense to call yourself a Tutsi or a Hutu, and that whenever one is asked, he should simply say, I'm a Rwandan. So my question is, is it not foreseeable that we can also adopt the same strategy here in closing the gaps by simply saying, I'm a Nigerian, then saying I'm a Hausa or Igbo? Thank you.
So these are the first set of questions. We have about 8 questions now. With your permission, after this, we can still go for another round, sir. Oh, do you want, we should take more questions? Okay, okay, sir.
I will try and answer these questions as quickly as possible, so if we need to take others. Study group 1 was why have Nigerian prejudices refused to die through the years? And I think a straightforward answer is because we have allowed a situation where our elite in particular promotes these divisions, especially as a means to attain political power. We have simply allowed it. And it's not, it's just the fact that we have not paid any attention to it. We allow it. Every cycle, every election cycle, we allow people to preach even on pulpits, preach in mosques, about religion and how it connects to voting for somebody or voting for the other person. Such things, of course, promote the sort of the divisions that we're talking about. And we allow our political leaders, we allow our religious leaders, our business leaders, to engage in this very divisive tactic of winning elections. So I think the important thing is to decide not to do so. And if we don't decide not to do so, then we have a problem. We have a continuing problem. And I think that that's my answer also to, I think, the question on why has it been difficult to sanction those who weaponize ethnicity? That's a study group 5. I think Uchenna asked that question. And I think it's straightforward. We have not taken a decision to do so. We have not. We don't have any laws that punish people who do so. And again, as I said, it comes down to an elite consensus that this is the way we want to run our country, beginning with leadership. How do we want to run our country? How do we want our country to run? The countries that have, the examples we've given, and there are so many other countries, we've just given recent examples. Those countries made a conscious decision that we're not going to run our country along these lines. You will not be allowed to do X, Y, Z. And yeah, just to the question, I think the last question that Ahmad Rufai asked, where he asked taxi drivers whether they were Hutsi or Tutsi in Rwanda, and their response was that I'm Rwanda. I think the important thing is the conscious decision that the leadership of that country took to say you will not be allowed to promote any kind of ethnic affiliation. You will not be allowed to promote it, and we can do so. It's entirely possible, and again, it just depends on leadership. It depends on what the elite decide, what the consensus of the elite is. That consensus of the elite, fortunately, unfortunately, depends largely on political leadership. It depends on what the political leadership want to achieve. And if you look at all the countries where this has been done, it has been by, the decision of the political leadership. My view is that we can do so, and that there is no reason why we cannot promote the Nigeria that we want to see. There's no reason why anybody, I mean, if for example, in a form that you are required to fill as a Nigerian, you are not required to fill where, tribe or ethnicity or even religion. Just say your name. What's your name? Where do you live? If we want to promote ethnic divisions, we can then say, well, this is where are you from, etc., etc. But there are ways, by which we can even, just by, steps that we take, prevent a situation where ethnic affiliations or religious affiliations are played up in the way that we have played them up in our own society. So I think it's really a matter of a conscious decision to do what we want for our nation. Professor Haruna, I think, well, you said, what will you advise course participants on unity? And I think for senior people in government, I think the problem always is how we respond within our own particular settings. We're always accused of, if a Yoruba man comes into a place, he brings only Yoruba people there. If an Igbo man comes to a place, brings only Igbos. If a Hausa, Fulani man comes, that people generally tend to bring people from their own respective tribes. Also out of a desire to protect themselves and a desire to ensure that in some senses they are more comfortable because they are in the company of people who speak their language. Again, by deliberate policy, this can be completely removed. If we want to enforce strictly, if we want to, even just our guidelines on federal character, if we enforce it strictly in those that we appoint, including personal staff that we appoint. So for example, if the president is going to appoint a chief of staff, or appoint a personal staff, or a vice president is expected to appoint a personal staff, he must still comply with federal character. So these are just issues that, we can take quickly, and these are issues that I believe can be dealt with on that level. Honorable Agunsoye wanted to know about the person who attained the age of 60 and who has refused to go. I think that that's a natural failing of many of us. Many people want to stay longer than they are required to be in office for various reasons. And it's not just this, I don't know, frankly, I'm not very familiar with this particular case, as you say, was reported in Punch newspapers yesterday. I'm not familiar with it. But I must say that I have come across many cases of people who, after the age of 60 or who have served 35 years, who still want to remain in office. And they devise all sorts of ways, sometimes reducing their ages and all sorts of things. So it's not entirely new. What I think is important is just enforcement of the regulation. We just make sure that regulation is enforced at the end of the day, that our laws, our policies are enforced. That's really what it comes down to, and that they're enforced without regard to anybody's particular connection or whatever it is that a person may be relying on to break the laws. Because these laws are what validate us, validate what we do, and we can't allow individuals to simply violate those laws. The question from study group 3 came from the Commissioner of Police, and he said the elite came together in Rwanda and Tanzania, and what are our own elite doing? I think quite rightly, Rear Admiral Adisokwe pointed out that that's a question that we must ask ourselves, because we are, in fact, the elite. Every one of us who is seated here constitutes that elite. But to make this, but to just answer the question more directly, I believe that it is up to political leadership in particular to convene these sorts of consensus and to ensure that these things happen. It's up to political leadership. It depends on what is our priority. If it's our priority to do so, then we do so. If it's not our priority, then we don't do it. So even where we have an elite such as we have here, and this elite is as diverse as it gets from every part of Nigeria, working together, studying together, doing things together, and coming together with common policies and ideas. This is the best representation of Nigeria. But this elite cannot act unless political leadership is prepared to act. So I think the first step is for political leadership to act. Study group 4, you have been in a position of trust for 8 years. What are those things that have been put in place to replicate the Fulani man heading the council in Enugu? I think that, again, this comes down to enforcement of policy and then deliberate passing of the kind of legislation that enables this to be possible. First of all, we must remove every trace of suggesting that anybody must be an indigene in order to be able to compete for political office. Now, don't forget that a lot of these things are subtle. They are not law. It's not as though there's a law that says you can't run for political office somewhere. But we must ensure that we do not allow it at all. And it's also possible for us, even by way of affirmative action, to insist that that we must have, even within our political, those who will run for political office, people from diverse parts of the country. It just depends on the formula that we choose to adopt. I think that we must think it through carefully and adopt a policy or policies that enable people who live within a community to be able to participate actively in the politics of the places where they reside. We cannot continue to have a situation where we still have this settler and indigene thing. It's counterproductive, and it's proved to be counterproductive all the time. So I think it comes down to the sorts of policies and regulations that we're prepared to make. And we must be creative about policy. We must be creative about these policies. We must find policies that work for us and then implement these policies. I think the question from study group 6 was about policy continuity and how will ABBA remain on the front burner. First, let me say that what we try to do in ABBA with the MSME clinics is something we've tried to replicate in other states, namely ensuring that we're able to bring regulators to MSMEs so that regulators and MSMEs can interact. And of course, this is to the benefit of MSMEs. And then, of course, also to see how we can promote policies that enable small businesses in different parts of our country to grow. I think that these are policies that we've already put in place. We've tried to institutionalize them. The MSME clinic, for example, is now properly institutionalized in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. The Office of the Vice President initiated it, but we worked very closely with Industry, Trade and Investment, and is now properly institutionalized there. So what one expects is that if we try to create some kinds of institutions around our policies, they will continue as time goes on. And it's also going to be up to the states and up to the MSMEs also to say that they want this policy and to seek to drive it. One of the reasons why we started the MSME clinics was because we found the need through the National Economic Council. The National Economic Council, of course, as you know, is a meeting of 36 governors, which I have the privilege of chairing. They made it clear to us that, look, for MSME growth, there was a need of one sort or the other. So the response to that was the clinics and the other things that we tried to do. So the neck of the National Economic Council is again another forum for ensuring continuity, especially federal policies that affect the states. Failure of policy has been topical, and is it possible to have a law to sanction those against the unity of the country? I think I've sort of taken that question. Of course, it is possible. It's possible to do so, and I think that that's really what we ought to seek to do, to make it difficult or to make it expensive for people to seek to divide our country and to divide our people. I think that just in the way that we make policies about other things that we think are important, we must prioritize our unity. We must prioritize our coming together as a nation. And we must ensure that we deprioritize all of those issues that attempt to divide us as a country. I think that countries that have made the decision to go forward as one people, especially a country with the diverse talent that we have, they must seek to protect it, and they have sought to protect it in other countries, and that's exactly what we must do. We must seek to protect what we have. If we divide into little groups and to little countries, we're of course going to lose out tremendously. There's very little to gain from breaking into the ethnic groups and numbers and all of those that predate our coming together as a nation. And those who seek to promote it, in my view, in my respectful view, are wrong. It is entirely wrong. We have the potential to be a great country. We can be a great country, but we have to do so deliberately. We have to do so intentionally. And anyway, when we have our little groups, if we are to break up into our tiny little countries, I think that that's when we are going to even see more division. Sometimes, when you look at the federal structure, the fact that we have a federation, the fact that we even have a federal government, is so helpful to some of the small divisions in our ethnic conclaves. If our ethnic conclaves are allowed to just develop the way they are, the kinds of divisions we have will be unbelievable. I know of my own ethnic conclave, and I know the kinds of divisions that are there. Thankfully, we do not have a situation where everybody goes out on their own and deals with their own problems. Those are the answers I have.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for His Excellency for his response to the first set of questions. DG, sir, can I go for another round? With the participants? Oh, all right, sir. I'm going to start from Schedule 7 now. Okay, Colonel. Schedule 7.
Your Excellency, I'm Colonel Wasiu Ademola Adigu. sponsored by the Nigerian Army. Sir, I was posted to just here as a young officer in the middle of the crisis that ravaged the state as far back as 2001. I've also had the opportunity to operate in other theaters in the country, all fighting crises that were born out of parochial sentiments, including indigent settler syndrome. Sir, with your experience in the office and other places that you have worked, do you think replacing the issue of state of origin with state of birth or state of residence will help to stem the tide of this unwanted crisis? Thank you, sir.
All right, study group 6. Study group 6. Study group 6, yes, correctional. I use study group 6. I'm going study group by study group. Study group 6, do I pass? Oh, okay. Study group 7, study group 6. All right, Captain Fingersy.
Your Excellency, sir, I am Navy Captain Emmanuel Tamnosiki Fingesi, sponsored by the Nigerian Navy. Sir, the National Institute has preferred several recommendations, and not just recommendations, as well as implementation strategies over its years of existence based on the theme given to the Institute. However, sir, it seems as if a lot of these recommendations have not or are yet to be implemented. I just want to know, sir, what can be done to address this issue. Thank you, sir.
Study group 5. Study group 5. Members of study group 5, please. Okay. Study group 5, Mrs. Aleto.
Your Excellency, sir, I am Olayinka Aleto, sponsored by the Presidency. So we have this generation, we call them Generation Z, and they don't believe in ethnic or religious diversity. They believe that we are all one. Is there any way that we can promulgate policies that will help this generation so that they won't be polluted by the older generation beliefs? So that in schools, in churches, in mosques, everywhere, this generation would be assisted so that they won't continue to believe that we are different, they are from different ethnic groups or anything. Is there anything so that this can help in nation building? Thank you.
Study group 4. The participants in white Agbada. Let's see your name now. Study group 4.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Kilo Alaji Bukar, Permanent Secretary, sponsored by Yobe State Government. Sir, my questions. NASCO, that is National Social Safety Net Coordinating Office, saddled with the responsibility of building database of poor and vulnerable households and coordinates social protection program in Nigeria. The program coordinates and establish more than 12 million poor and vulnerable households.
Can you take it gently, please?
Okay, sir. Which contains about more than 52 individuals in the register. The National Social Register is the largest database of poor and vulnerable households in the world, which is the most reliable and integrity data, from which different organizations have mined to extend benefits to the millions of Nigeria. and federal government of Nigeria enrolled 9.8 million poor and vulnerable households in the National Social Register. Sir, the initial phase of this National Social Safety Net project closed in June 2022. Sir, what are the plans lined up to take the next phase to the level that the benefit Nigerian ever than in the initial phase? Thank you, sir.
Okay, can you take the last part again, please? Pamsa Kilo.
Okay, sir, the social protection project was closed in June 2022, and it has impacted a lot to the Nigerians poor and vulnerable households. So what are the plans for the continuity of the second phase?
Study Group 3, Mr. Tunde Olaifa. Hold on, please, a little bit. Just hold on a little while. On the mic, please. Assist him. Okay. Hold on. All right, go ahead.
Your Excellency, thank you. I'm glad that you highlighted the crucial importance of political leadership in ensuring cohesion. What suggestions or recommendations do you have for how we can recalibrate the mechanics of the political process that would increase or assure of the likelihood of the emergence of the kind of political leadership you spoke of? Thank you.
All right. I want. Okay. As you are here, it's part of what you are supposed to answer, but the Excellency will answer your question. That's why we have 77 of you. 70 what? 97, sorry. 97. All right. Study Group 2 will be getting ready. Study Group 2. Raise your hand if you want to raise your hand. All right, sir. The medical doctor.
Thank you, sir. Alara Bisani Garko, Professor of Internal Medicine and Cardiology, ABU Zaria, sponsored by National Universities Commission. Sir, Julius Nyerere's philosophy was based on Ujamaa, which is a Swahili word for familyhood. Since the elite have failed, apparently, can the government go by the way of executive order to borrow his principles, do model villages just like Singapore, and start from the grassroots, sir, just like we saw you at the trader money in the market, so that government reach out to the grassroots, the model communities that has served all the ethnic groups, or most of the ethnic groups, so that the social mobilization starts from there. Probably that would be the solution. Thank you, sir.
Study Group 1. Yes. Study Group 1. Hold on. Okay, all right, go ahead.
Idoko Enejo Celestine, Permanent Secretary, sponsored by Kogi State Government. Sir, he said that this institute is a think tank, a center for research and better society. Why is it impossible that the policies being recommended from this institute is not being implemented by the government?
This is similar to Captain Fingasi, so I'll still take another question. I'll take another. Okay, I'll call on the CP now. It's similar to what Captain Fingers asked.
Your Excellency, sir. I am Commissioner of Police Suleiman Muhammad Abdul. Sir, the weaponization of religion and ethnicity is a function of corruption adopted by the elite. And corruption cases have been dragging in court for several years. Sir, what is your take in employing, in creating special courts to treat corruption cases, and also employing the issue of plea bargaining as a tool for dispensation of quick justice? Thank you, sir.
We have 7 now, sir. We have 7 questions now. No, the Excellency will answer these first 7, then if we still have time, we'll go for the next. Time, okay. Sir.
Thank you very much. I'll just go through this very quickly. We'll begin with Group 7. I agree with you, Colonel, that one of the ways of removing parochial sentiment is by replacing state of origin with state of birth or residence. As a matter of fact, this is one of the, I sort of alluded to this in my lecture, and I believe that it's the right way to go. And we must be bold in making the kind of policy and regulations that we, that will make a difference. We must be bold, and I agree with you entirely that where you emphasize state of birth or residence, after a while, that just becomes the norm. And I think that that's certainly a way of dislodging parochial sentiment. Group 6, this issue about the national, the NIPS's recommendations not being implemented. Let me say first that I do not totally agree that that is the case, with all due respect to all those who have mentioned this fact. The truth of the matter is that a lot of these recommendations are taken on board and many are implemented. You see, the point that you know with government policy is that you cannot take something hook, line, and sinker. I've looked at several of the ideas that have come out of NIPS, several of those ideas. Many of them are repeated in one way or the other in some cases. There are a few new ideas, a few fresh ideas. Several of them are taken on board. And I think it's important for us to carry out a study looking at government policy and government and implementation, because frankly, a lot of, if you look at education and educational policy, a lot of what has been recommended from NIPS is evident in several policies over the years. It may not be taken hook, line, and sinker. All of it may not be taken. And that's by the very nature of what a think tank is. As a think tank, you must never expect that you propose a policy and the whole thing is taken. Some of the ideas will be taken, some of the ideas will be adopted, some of it will not be adopted. Because the role of the executive, the role of government, is to take a look at ideas, take a look at policy and say, okay, we're going to do this or do that in this particular way. So I don't think it is entirely right to say that NIPS's policy recommendations have been ignored. I don't think so at all. When we came to office in 2015, we took a good look at several things that had been recommended. And you will find that recommendations, not just from NIPS, by the way, very excellent policies from here and there. Our problem has never been these policies. It is in seeing them through, making sure that when you have a policy, you see it through. You have the capacity to see it through. Because many things are begun, but not completed. So seeing things through, making sure that we implement is really, in my own view, the major problem that we have. And the other thing I'd like to say with respect to policy coming out of NIPS is that sometimes we need to be a bit more intentional in what we are focusing on. There are some things that have been overflogged, and there are issues that require our immediate attention. There are certain things that have been overflogged, and sometimes policy tends to become so verbose. There's so much talk in the policy and very little by way of implementation. One thing that you will notice, and I'm sure that for most who are seated here are in one executive capacity or the other, wherever you function. One thing you will notice is that hardly anybody wants to read a big document. Hardly anybody. Even professors don't want to read big documents. So it is important for us to recognize that and go to the point as intentionally as possible. Because you tend to find that there are documents, huge documents. Some of us may like to read those huge documents, but the vast majority of us are not interested in reading huge documents. So I think also, just in terms of policy, we should also adopt the policy of ensuring that the proposals we make are not too verbose, and also show a clear pathway to implementation. What you find in some of the proposals, and this is not necessarily a critique of how NIPS's proposals are, because a lot of them, of course, are of the highest quality, but you tend to find an over-concentration on the problem and very little by way of how to ensure implementation. So I think that some of these issues are important, just so that we can not only ensure that these things are implemented, but are also easy to track when we want to track implementation. So I go to study group 5. Mrs. Aleto wanted to know, how can we protect Gen Z, this special generation of young people, from the contamination of primordial considerations and all that. I agree with you that a lot of our young people, and a new generation of young people is coming where some of these considerations around tribe and ethnicity are being de-emphasized. And we've seen that, especially in the past few years. And it deserves to be protected. But the way to do it is, it has to be comprehensive. We cannot do it just for a generation of people. It must be the comprehensive policy of the state. The state itself must decide. This is how we want to proceed. This is what we want to do for our people. The suggestion made about emphasizing state of birth or state of residence is an important one. Teaching in our schools, that this country is a civic nation. It's a nation that emphasizes no discrimination on the basis of circumstances of birth, religion, or ethnicity. Those are the sorts of things that we must emphasize and teach and practice. And I believe that making it a deliberate policy of government is a way to go. So that it's not just about protecting one generation, but it's about protecting even the coming generations and those of us who represent these rather delinquent generations. Study group 4, this was a question around the National Social Register and what there is to continue the National Social Register, the second phase. I think that we should look at the National Social Register, first of all, as policy. It is the policy of the federal government to develop a social register. The fact that it was aided or sponsored by some of our development partners and that funding has come to an end does not make it any less the policy of the federal government. As a matter of fact, the federal government intends to continue developing the National Social Register, whether or not it is funded by the World Bank or whoever else. So the issue really is that we must, and we now have the humanitarian affairs, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs for short. That ministry's role, or that ministry's duty, is to ensure that the social register is continually developed. Because the whole point of it is that we're trying to track the number and location of the poorest people in our society. And it's proved to be a very useful tool for implementing some of the policies that the government proposed. So I think that the continuity of it can only be assured by the way that the ministry takes it. It's federal government policy. And I think that they would see it as such. To your life, you asked a very difficult question. How do we recalibrate the political process to provide the type of leadership of which I spoke? I think that it's a very difficult question indeed. And it's a question that I'd like to throw back to you. But frankly, you know, it's the point that we will always, what we'll always find is that the soul of our country is always in contention. It is always in contention. And in this cycle of elections, the soul of our country was also in contention. Sometimes you get the results that you want. Other times you don't get the results that you want. But I think that what is important is the aggregation of people of like minds, so that at least at some point we're able to get a critical mass of people who are thinking alike and who want to enforce and who would like to see the type of Nigeria of their dreams. Now that within the political space is entirely possible. It will involve a lot of sacrifice, but it's entirely possible. And I believe that that is the role and duty that some of us must undertake, to continue to strive for that critical mass of Nigerians who see what we want to achieve as a nation and are prepared to go ahead and ensure that we take it. And my view is that the day will come. I have no doubt in my mind that the day will come. That we'll see the kind of leadership and the kind of country that we want. But it will take continuous effort and evolution in some cases. I think that where we're at and where we'll be will always be determined by ourselves and what we choose to do in the months and years to come. So I'm very optimistic that we will, if we keep our focus, we will get to where our country deserves to be. Study group 2, can the government use executive orders to implement social mobilization along the lines of what occurred in Tanzania? Yes, I believe that not just executive orders, but all manner of laws and regulations and the enforcement of those laws and regulations. Executive orders, of course, are important, a good way of sometimes short-circuiting the long legislative process. But we must go beyond any type of executive order. The good thing about executive orders is that it shows executive will. It demonstrates the willingness and the desire of the political elite, in the executive in particular, to implement certain things. And that's why I think an executive order is a good thing, because it sends a strong signal that we want to do this, and that as president or as the governor of a state, this is what we intend to achieve. I think it's a very powerful signal to everyone, and I think it's a good way to go about it. But I think just within the broader spectrum of regulations and laws and implementation of those regulations and laws, that's probably where we will find the greatest traction. Study group 1, CP, wanted to know the weaponization of ethnicity as a function of corruption and whether we should have special courts and the plea bargain process. I agree entirely that in many cases, the weaponization of ethnicity and religion is also very closely associated with corruption. And you find it everywhere. You find people who, if a person steals and is caught, he says, the reason why I've been caught is because I'm a Christian. Or the reason why I've been caught is because I'm a Muslim. Or because I come from this tribe or that tribe. But the facts show that you stole money, you know, and that you ought to account for stealing the money. But it's very easy in an ethnically and religiously charged political space for you to hide under religion or ethnicity to cover corruption. And that happens repeatedly all the time. But the good thing, and I keep repeating this everywhere I have the opportunity, that if you look at a charge sheet, where a charge, and most of us know what a charge sheet is, you never find people of one ethnicity or one religion. If 3 people are charged with corruption in Nigeria, trust me, you will find one from Southwest, one from North, East or West, one from South somewhere, you will find. You will never, one Muslim, one Christian, you will never find only Muslims or only Christians or only people from a particular place. So it's evident that even within this whole space that we have, despite the ethnicity and all of that, people still collaborate to do evil. And they work very hard together to steal resources. People, you know, this is something that people agree to do, you know. So again, just to demonstrate that it is possible for Nigerians to work together and to cooperate, even when that cooperation is for purposes of stealing the resources of the nation. So I think that it is possible, you know, to stop this, you know, because, and we can do so. Special courts are very useful, but it depends on how special courts are framed. There's a proposal on the use of special courts, which is one where the special courts are courts of summary jurisdiction, and where appeals terminate at the Court of Appeal for these special anti-corruption courts. And this, I think, can be effectively worked out, you know, if we choose to do so. But and what it involves, first of all, is upturning the burden of proof. So if the burden of proof is usually on the prosecution, in some cases, the burden of proof would lie on, and in the cases of corruption, the burden of proof would lie on the person who has been found or who is being investigated for corruption. And so, for example, if 1 billion naira is found in the account of a person who is a director somewhere in the Ministry of Justice, the burden of proof must be upon that director, because if you add up his earnings, he cannot have 1 billion naira in his account. And if he does, he should explain how come. He can tell us that his father inherited money from his father, he got a blessing from somewhere, whatever. But he is the one who must explain. The burden cannot lie on the state. Today, the burden is on the state. So a person, for example, who says who collected, you know, gifts of $1 million, says that prove that it says to the state, you prove that this is corrupt, even though there's no way I could possibly have $1 million, because I'm not paid in dollars, I'm paid in naira. How did you get $1 million? Today, it is the state that proves. So I think that in these special courts, the more important thing is the way the courts are organized. First of all, the courts must be courts of summary jurisdiction. And then, of course, questions of standard of proof, questions of burden of proof must also be such that the burden rests on the person who is being investigated. And of course, plea bargains. You know, plea bargains have been. I think they've really gotten a bad name over time, because you find that people who, for instance, a man steals 50 million and is asked to pay a fine of 1 million or something, and if he spent 1 year in detention or something, that is commuted, and he says, well, that's sufficient. I think that plea bargains are good, they're effective for ensuring the quick dispensation of cases, but they must also reflect the nature and the seriousness of the offense, so that the nature and seriousness of the offense is not bargained What is bargained is the time it takes for prosecution, so that the person who is entering into a plea bargain, yes, gets an advantage, but it's not an advantage that obscures the seriousness of the offense. Those, I think, are the questions that have been asked. Thank you.
A round of applause for His Excellency for those in-depth responses on the second round of questions. For want of time, we'll quickly move to the faculty, and I will take just about 3 interjections. Your Excellency, sir, for the interjections from the faculty, you are not expected to make any response, except you are the first. Okay, we'll take only 1. Oh. Yes, only 1. Okay, Professor Okume.
Ojuba Olufunke Okome, directing staff. I think in addition to the weaponization of ethnicity and religion, we have the weaponization of gender and class in Nigeria. Because if you look at who is doing well across the board, you see these dynamics operating. And I'm brokenhearted because I think we are a nation that has great potential, but we refuse to seize the opportunities that are available to us to build our nation. And the responsibility is individual. It's not just the elites, it's everybody. It's communal, although, you know, the common people, the masses, they don't have power, so maybe we should focus on the elites. It's also communal, and it's institutional. And as I said before, each of us is implicated. I have lived in the US for 42 years, and I dare say I have more rights there than I have in Nigeria. I'm one of the Nigerians that has married outside of my ethnicity. And so if I dare to go to my husband's ethnic group and I say I want to contest for anything, they'll smack me down. And, you know, so it's tragic because we are not going to be the great nation that we say we want to be if we maintain the discriminatory and biased and unjust positions that we currently do. So without really going on and on, the change, it begins with each of us. Are we really ready to lead the change? I think we love to talk, but nobody is really, a critical mass of us refuses to embrace the change and start doing things differently, because the cost of going outside the kind of structures that we have built up, they're very high. So thank you very much. It's been instructive listening to you.
Thank you, Professor Okwemen. We now move to the management for their interjections. Members of the management. Oh, Professor Dumpansha.
Let me thank Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, sir, for giving us your thoughts on this burning issue. To have a discussion around the building a homeland just at the end of the conclusion of an election is quite key. And I can tell you, sir, that in the next 2-3 weeks, the thoughts that you've put on the table would be issues of national conversation. And I think it's a conversation that is very healthy in view of the fact that we are unable, for a long time, been able to have a homeland. What we've been able to have are basically lands. What we've been able to have are basically homes, and we don't have national homeland. I think for addressing this, is quite key for us as patriots and nationalists of this country. So it's a very big project that I think the National Institute should look into. And I'm suggesting that probably we should be thinking of having a national dialogue on homeland building or some other refined ways which we can put this. And it can take maybe a modified form of the national conference that we had sometimes in 2014 or so. And we can modify that and have a very strong and very committed discussion around this issue. So I'm saying this also to make the point that whether we have national reforms, policy reforms, or we have improved legal frameworks that will either deal with settler indigent dichotomy, it's not going to go anywhere, sir. We can put in the Constitution that we should recognize settlers or we should recognize indigents. If there is no national reorientation, change our minds to accept one another, these constitutional provisions won't go anywhere. And I like the point that you put on the table, sir, that leadership is key. If you don't have a leadership, that is excellent and is willing to show examples, then let's forget about it. We can mount it, we can have it in our constitution, and if we don't practice, we will not go anywhere. Therefore, I would conclude by saying that we need a homeland where Pam, Fumi, and Baba Osinbajo will have rights and freedoms. Where you can go and you have your rights and freedoms. Where you will feel safe in these locations. Where you will be loved in these locations. And where you will not feel discriminated against. Once we have a homeland that exhibits all these attributes, I'm telling you, sir, we would have a homeland that all of us will be happy with. So as we leave the office probably in May, I think maybe the DG will make this. You can come to the National Institute and spend maybe 3 months. And probably we'll put you in one of the groups to direct. Or more importantly, we can give you a space to put your thoughts for the 8 years and have some conversation, real national conversation on the kind of issues that you've interacted with in the office. DG, sir, this is something that you can take on board. But I honestly thank you for your honest discussions on issues of national importance. This one is quite honest. The one that you send the Minister for Labor and Productivity, Baba Ngige, to come, was also very frank. And I think that the recommendations out of that document were quite critical. So thank you very much for coming and to share with us.
I will now, okay, the Director of Studies wants to make some interjections.
Your Excellency, sir, thank you very much for the very thought-provoking presentation on this maiden lecture. I just wanted to set the record straight with regards to what NIPS has done in the past and some of the policy recommendations and the level of uptake. Actually, in 2018, Yemi Olomola, MNI, who you know very well, her project was on the level of policy uptake from the National Institute. And she looked over a 10-year period at policies put forward by the senior executive course and found out that at the federal government level at least, the level of policy uptake was less than 5%. And that's an empirical data, and I think we can do better. And we have put in place, or we are in the process of putting in place, a policy monitoring mechanism to see what we can do to track the level of policy uptake. So hopefully there can be a closer working relationship between the National Institute and the federal government to ensure a higher level of policy uptake. And by the way, sir, that study was replicated from one done by Prince Adelusi Adeluyi in 1995 that found the level at a similar level. That means that the level of uptake hasn't really increased. Having said that, sir, in 2011, Sec 33 did a study called Managing Nigerians' Pluralism for Peace and National Development. I believe that there is much to glean from that lecture that coincides with some of the excellent thoughts you have put out there today. And I'm wondering whether we can go forward to have a rapid action plan from your lecture and that particular Senior Executive Course report that would help the next government to do something more about a merit-based, inclusive Nigerian democracy. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Before I call on the DG to wrap up the session, we now call on our distinguished invited guests for comments or interjections from our invited guests. All right. Thank you very much. A round of applause for His Excellency, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, SAN GCON, for this wonderful presentation. Please, let's give me a round of applause. It's now time for some presentation. Okay. Your Excellency, sir, it is customary that the direct beneficiaries of this maiden lecture appreciate your effort by moving a vote of thanks. I will now call Colonel Ibrahim Yusuf, the Monitor General for Senior Executive Course 45, 2023, to move the vote of thanks. Colonel Yusuf.
Your Excellency, the Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, Senior Nigerian Army, Director General, National Institute of Police and Strategic Studies, Professor Ayo Motayo, Your Royal Majesty, the Bongom of Jos, Secretary and Director of Administration, Director of Studies, Director of Research Studies, Director of Research, Institute Librarian, members of Research Directorate, members of Directing Staff, fellow members of Senior Executive Course 45 of 2023, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am Colonel Ibrahim Yusuf, sponsored by the Nigerian Army and Monitor General of Senior Executive Course 45 of 2023. On behalf of the Director General and the entire National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies community, I would like to extend our most profound gratitude to our guest lecturer and the respected Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for finding it worthy to come in person to deliver to us this lecture titled Creating a Homeland for All, Nation Building in a Diverse Democracy. We acknowledge that our guests could have sent someone to represent him, or at best, deliver this lecture via Zoom, but he chose to go through the hurdles of coming in person to Kuru to deliver this all-important lecture. We consider this as a mark of high respect. I'm profoundly grateful, and I therefore invite my fellow participants to stand up and give our guest lecturer a standing ovation. Thank you, you may sit. Your Excellency, sir, we have been enriched by the lecture you delivered to us today. We are even more energized to give our best to discuss and come up with an impactful report towards a better society. It is our prayer that even as you leave office shortly, you will continue to offer this nation your invaluable experience, and pray that you honor this institute whenever they call on you. Once again, on behalf of the Director General, the entire NIPS community, we thank you immensely and wish you a safe journey back to Abuja and God's abiding grace on your future endeavors. Thank you, and God bless you.
We're going to take the photographs, thereafter national anthem. Okay. Okay. He's not sitting, we're starting. No, we're not sitting. We want us to sit. But that's what this is what we do. Please, participants, come together so that there won't be any gap.
Directing staff, please, we can join in the second row. Thank you. Participants, you can cover up to the second row, please. Yes. Participants, please, let's cover up, especially those behind. Can you just hurry up and let's cover up on the second row. Thank you very much. Please, let's be smart about it. All right, so we're about taking, please. Hello? We're taking, please. We're done. Thank you very much, sir.
The national anthem, please. With the national anthem, we've come to the end of this presentation, the maiden presentation. Participants, please take your seat. while the DG will see of His Excellency. Participants, please sit down. Participants, please sit down. Now, the next thing on the program is commissioning ceremony of the NAF and the Nigerian Army Directing Staff quarters. So only the Senior Executive Corps ESCO and the chairpersons and Army and Air Force officers are to go. All other officers are to sit. Yes, I know, I've told them. The next lecture is taking place, but you go for your lunch and come back. You go for lunch and come back. They are the one moderating. Okay. Now the time is now 5 minutes past 4. So, 4:35. Okay. So by 20 minutes to 5, you are expected to be back in the auditorium. That's 4:40. So people go and have your lunch and come back. It's a long day. It's not going to be always like this. Legal advisor. So you are back here. AIG Galantanchi is the moderator. Please, MG.